Hey everyone, Shastra here. I hope you're having a great day because I have a new composing lesson guide for you. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to create your very own impact sound or impact sound hit effect. Let's take a listen to how the final sample actually sounds before we move on with this video. This is something that is useful mostly in trailers, film scores and game soundtracks, but occasionally finds uses in other music genres. Be sure to give the video a like or a dislike, as well as to check the link to my Twitch where I stream both gaming and music composing content. I would like to point out that impacts are used in other music genres, and the techniques and the way of making impacts are also applicable to any other type of music. So I hope this lesson benefits a lot of you guys and girls out there. I will leave a link to the sample of this impact for anyone to download if he wants to use it completely free. There will be some time lapsing during the video, the reason being that I like to play around and experiment while making new sounds, and at the same time I wanted to make the video as short as possible and to include the most important things I did for designing the specific impact, alongside tips that you can use yourself for making your own. The first thing I will do is use taiko samples from action tracks to create a low sounding hit. When you go about doing sound design, you have to know that layering multiple sounds and sources is something good and necessary for creating a different type of sound. You should also not worry about adding many effects or doing overboard EQ. You can never get enough EQ when doing sound designs. I'm playing around with the velocity of the sample to see which one gives a better low and hit sound. A technique here is to lower the velocity between 60 and 80 and then boost the volume of the sample. Low velocity hits have more depth and more presence in the lower register, unlike high velocity, which gives a better low end sound. Since I want the sound of the hit to have the low end presence and the sub-hit presence, I will be putting a 30 decibel high pass filter at around 50 Hz. I want to keep some of the frequency which cannot be heard by the human ear, but also not overcrowd the sample with them. This way you'll have enough sound to make your desk wobble a bit. What I do next is put a low pass filter and get rid of all the unnecessary high frequencies from the sample. You have to do this based on your own design and how you feel you want to make your impact. I did a serious cut of frequencies in the high end because I will be layering at least 2 or 3 more hits on top of this one to create the final sample. I also want to use this hit solely for the low end. What I'll be doing next is adding a reverb. By accident I added another equalizer, but mistakes are made and to be corrected. What I want to do with the reverb is actually make it wide, spacious and very long, but actually by long I want to make the space big, because depending on the type of reverb you'll be using, you'll have a different interface. I'm using the Fab Filter one, which I recommend because it's an awesome one. So we're gonna give the brightness a full dark theme. We're gonna make it a chorus one. We're gonna give the distance to be far. And firstly I tried the decay to be a lot, but then I noticed that it doesn't sound so right, and I would rather have the decay to be less and to increase the volume of the reverb sound itself. I also did some editing in the EQ of the reverbs, decay rate and the post EQs before and after, because I wanted this to have a deep booming sound, so I kind of got rid of all of the major high frequencies and just left stuff around up to 2K to be sounding and then boosting the low ends. And finally, of course, make it as wide as possible because you need to have presence in the low end. I'll be finishing the EQing and effects on this one with a compressor with a relatively high compression rate, around 5 or 6 at a -25 threshold, but I'm gonna be leaving a relatively fast attack at around 10 milliseconds and fast release at around 50 or 60 and boosting the gain. It's important to do the compression after all of the other effects you have done, for the compressor to be the glue that combines the reverb and everything else into one solid big booming sound. Next, I will be using a couple of cinematic tom samples to create the low mid and mid range of my impact sound. I used more of the room microphones for the samples in order to get a little more wideness in the mix of these frequencies. EQing here, I did a high pass filter at around 120 Hz so that I can free up space for the previous hit and focus more on the middle frequencies of this sample. I would advise you guys to boost around 200 Hz or 500 Hz. It actually depends a lot on the type of sample and the type of sound you're using. I will be boosting around 200 Hz, maybe even a bit in the 500s, but the main idea is to listen and to decide how you want something to sound. I liked how the sound of boosting at 200 Hz was, and I also did a small cut around 2000 because I'm planning to add another sample later for the high mids and a third one for the high ends. But to compensate this, I did give around 3 decibels of boost of a high shelf on 7K. The next thing I did is add some saturation to the sound using the Decapitator plugin. You can use any saturation VST effect, it is not necessary to get this one, but it is definitely a good one to have. I gave it a small drive boost at around 2 and then played around with the mix and output since I did not want it to be too harsh and too imposing in the overall mix of the impact. We were going for an impact, so I reduced the tone to a dark one at the end and left the low and high cut at their default positions after playing around with them for a bit. Also, I wanted to hear a bit of the dry signal, so I left the mixed level at roughly 70%. The final effect that I added was a distortion. I used the default Cubase distortion plugin. The final settings I had were a 5.5 boost and a 3.5 feedback, 100% mix, around 6 on the tone and spatial knobs, and a -5 decibels on the output. I suggest you play around with your available distortion plugin to achieve the sound you like, but do not go overboard with the feedback and the boost. They can create a lot of useless noise in the final sound, which is unnecessary. It is better to leave them in the more mid and low levels. Since the saturation of the original sample had a dark tone, and I also added a dark tone to the Decapitator, I decided to set the distortion here to a middle ground between dark and bright to give a small contrast to the overall final sample sound. The third sound I decided to use was a dumpster one from the Damage library. I gave it a closed position on the stage setting and then decided to add some distortion for more mid and high-end presence. The final distortion settings I went for were a full tone at 100%, around 70% drive, 0% bass and 100% brightness. I reduced the closed microphone to -2 decibels, increased the room microphone to +2 decibels and decreased the hose microphone to -5 decibels, since quite frankly that was how I liked the sound of it. Overall, I always take away hole and reverb microphone positions from samples which I use for the high ends when I'm doing a sound design. I like how this opens up the mix for me and gets rid of some unnecessary high-end frequencies from the recording. Finally, I decided to add a slight compression with the built-in compressor of Damage. Compression was left at around 18% with a 4:1 ratio and relatively low attack and release with 3 milliseconds on attack and 100 milliseconds on release. For the EQ, I did a high-pass filter at around 80 Hz combined with a further bell cut at roughly 95 Hz with -5 decibels. This was in order to give space for the other samples to fill that range and avoid having any muddiness in the mix. I wanted to add a bit more presence for the given sample, so I gave it a +5 decibels of boost at roughly 1.5 kHz and finished everything off with an open high shelf boost of around +3 decibels at 5 kHz. The next effect I added was an Ozone 8 imager, which was used to make the sample wider in all of its frequencies. You can use any equivalent imager plugin or plugin which allows you to control how wide the sample is. The simplest ones are mono to stereo plugins, but I recommend using something from Ozone or FabFilter which has more versatility and functions. The third effect I used was FabFilter's Reverb plugin. I used the horn plate preset from the medium ones. I increased its size a bit to 2.5 seconds and decided to go for a very wide and far away sounding reverb which had more brightness and a chorus feel. I left the mix at 50% because that is my preferred way of using reverbs. You can also do a duplicate of the track and use one track without reverb effects and a second one with 100% reverb and mix both of them together to achieve some other results. The last effect I used was Punish by Heaviosity. This is a multi-effect plugin containing a compressor, saturation, transients, equalizer and a limiter. I used the default preset and disabled the compressor, boosted the saturation a bit and then tweaked it alongside the output and its whole Punish function until I liked how it sounded. I advise you guys to experiment with Punish because it is an awesome tool which can give you a lot of possibilities. It can also push instruments and samples through the mix, give them space, and overall is a good plugin to have, especially for film and trailer musicians. The next sample I used was the Surdo ensemble from Hans Zimmer's Percussions. Whenever I use samples which have multiple microphone positions, I always enable all of them and mix and match to get a unique sound. The last thing I did was check how the sample sounded in full stereo white and decided to stick with a more monocentral sound. The other sample had plenty of wideness contributing to the mix, so I wanted this one to hit more in a central mid spot. The EQ here was a high-pass filter at roughly 80 Hz combined with the bell boost at around 120 Hz of roughly 3 dB. I decided to cut the high frequencies a bit by doing a high shelf cut of -3 dB at around 2 kHz and also a further bell cut at 700 Hz of -5 dB. This was in order to give a low-end boost without creating too much mud and clean up a bit of the high frequency so they do not fight with the other samples. The final sample that I used was once again from Action Strikes. I chose the huge taiko ensemble hit and fully moved the microphone position to the room one. Then I added a slight boost in the tuning to make it higher pitched. My idea for this one was to create a hybrid sounding part which incorporates a real percussive instrument at its base and then layer effects on top of it. And one of the best ways to do that is to use the Guitar Rig plugin and pass the sample through a few guitar amps and effects. You can use the same components as I did to create a similar effect for your sample, but as with everything in sound design, I would urge you to experiment and try to create a unique sounding sample. For my sample, I used the Bass Pro amplifier with its matching cabinet. Since I did not want the sample to have a lot of low ends, but a more mid sound, I cut the bass completely off, reduced the gain, and gave the drive a slight boost. I increased the mid frequencies and the treble slightly. On the cabinet, I used the gratifier preset with a change to the microphone position to be more towards section B and having a more dry sound. Then I added a demon distortion where once again I completely cut the bass off, gave it a small volume boost, increased the mids considerably and then gave it just a touch of gain. The final effect I added was a chorus/flanger effect which I set to its flanger counterpart. The speed was set to 1.5, intensity to 4 and release to 6. For the EQ of the sample, I put a low-pass filter at around 3 kHz and a high-pass filter at around 160 Hz. Again, I'm trying to give the sound a mid-boost and I'm clearing up the mud it may cause in the high and low frequency ends. I gave it a 5 dB boost at around 300 Hz and a slight decrease at around 1.6 kHz with 3 dB. I did not like a certain part of the sample that I caught in that range, so I cut it slightly off. As for the boost, it added more presence in the mix of the sample. With this, I mostly finished with the sound design. What I did to finalize it was some EQing and compression on the master bus to get everything nice and glued together. For the EQ, I did a very heavy high-pass filter at 60 Hz alongside a relatively wide 6 dB boost at 100 Hz. I felt like the final result needed a bit more presence in the low end in order to feel like a proper impact. I also did a -3 dB cut at around 3 kHz because I wanted to get a more evened out frequency range in the mid and early high frequencies, and also to complement that I did a high shelf at around 10 kHz of 3 dB of gain. I also added a very big boost at around 1 kHz because I really liked the combined sound in those frequencies of the sample and I wanted to cut a bit more through the mix and the final thing. I finished everything off with a compressor at -24 dB and a 6:1 ratio. The attack was set at around 50 milliseconds and the release on roughly 10 milliseconds. Then I just compensated with gain to the reasonable levels. And that is all there is to it. Let's take a listen to the final result once again. This is all for this sound design lesson. I hope you found it useful and enjoyable. I will leave a link in the description to the final export of this impact if anyone wants to use it. It is completely free to do that. Be sure to give the video a like or a dislike as you see fit, as well as to drop a comment down below with feedback. Also remember to check the links in the description to my Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, Discord community and Facebook page where I invite you to follow me. Finally, of course, if you want to see more content like this, then subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon in order to get notifications. This is everything from me for this video. See you in the next one. Shadow Strider out.